The scent of roasting lamb and expensive lilies, a cloying mix of celebration and polite expectation, hung heavy in the air of my own dining room. 70 years. 70 years had woven the tapestry of Agnes Miller's life, a life that, to most, seemed as unremarkable and comfortable as the worn armchair by my fireplace. But as I sat at the head of my polished mahogany table, a forced smile plastered on my lips, I felt the familiar stir of something much deeper, something sharp and watchful that had long ago learned to hide beneath the veneer of kindly grandmotherhood. This was my birthday, a milestone, yet it felt less like a celebration and more like an endurance test. My daughter, Bethany, shimmered at the opposite end, a vision of curated perfection in a dress that cost more than my first car. Her laughter, bright and slightly brittle, cut through the clinking of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation. She was 45, a woman who clung to every vestige of youth with a ferocity that bordered on desperation. Her husband, Daniel, a man whose ambition had long been overshadowed by his wife's demands, chuckled dutifully beside her, occasionally casting a nervous glance my way. My granddaughter, Emily, a wisp of 16 with eyes that saw too much, sat quietly, observing the charade with a wisdom beyond her years. She was the only one whose gaze felt truly honest, a small, warm anchor in a sea of manufactured affection. "Mother, darling, aren't you going to enjoy your exquisite meal?" Bethany called out, her voice carrying a theatrical lilt that grated on my nerves. She gestured towards the untouched plate before me, as if my lack of appetite was a personal affront to her hosting skills, even though this was my home, my kitchen, my hired caterer. "You look a little tired. Perhaps too much excitement." A faint flush crept up my neck. "Tired, yes. Tired of playing the part. Tired of the thinly veiled condescension." "I'm perfectly fine, dear," I replied, my voice a little softer than it once was, holding a steely undercurrent only I could hear. The evening wore on, a pageant of performative familial love. Gifts were exchanged, expensive, impersonal tokens chosen, no doubt, by Bethany's assistant. Cake was served, champagne flowed. The air grew thicker with the sweet, boozy fumes and the hum of forced conviviality. It was during the toast, after Daniel had delivered a rather bland speech about my enduring strength and resilience, that the incident occurred. Bethany, flushed with wine and the spotlight she craved, decided she needed to rearrange the seating plan for a group photo. Or rather, she decided I needed to move. My seat, at the very head of the table, was apparently not picturesque enough for her. "Mother, can you just scoot down a bit? Or better yet, switch with Emily." No, even better. Let's get a shot of the younger generation at the head. It's much more visually appealing, don't you think?" She fluttered her perfectly manicured hand, dismissing my 70 years of life as an aesthetic inconvenience. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a dull ache that had become my constant companion over the years whenever Bethany exercised her peculiar brand of entitlement. But tonight, it felt sharper. "Bethany, this is my seat. It's my birthday." My voice was calm, perhaps too calm. She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that bounced off the ornate ceiling. "Oh, Mother, don't be so dramatic. It's just for a photo." Besides, she leaned in conspiratorially, her breath smelling of champagne and something sickly sweet. "This spot belongs to my freshness and beauty now. Go on, darling, move aside." And then, she did it. Not a gentle nudge, not an accidental brush. With a deliberate, almost theatrical push of her hand against my shoulder, she propelled me sideways. My foot, tangled beneath the heavy linen tablecloth, lost its purchase. The world tilted. A gasp rippled through the room, muted and hesitant. I fell. Not gracefully. Not with a quiet thud. I fell with the ungainly sprawl of an old woman, my hips striking the cold, polished oak floor with a sickening crack. The platter of cheese, still laden with expensive brie, slid from the table, shattering on impact. A silence, heavy and absolute, descended upon the room. My champagne glass, mercifully empty, clattered somewhere nearby. For a moment, All I could feel was the shock of the cold floor against my cheek, the sudden, searing pain in my hip, and the overwhelming, crushing humiliation. My family, my guests, frozen in various states of horror and embarrassment, stared down at me. No one moved. No one rushed forward. Not immediately. Then, Emily was there, a shadow of genuine concern on her young face, kneeling beside me. "Grandma, are you okay?" "Mom, what did you do?" Her voice was small, but it cut through the silence. Bethany, for her part, looked less shocked by my fall and more annoyed by the broken cheese platter. "Mother, honestly. So clumsy. Look at this mess." It was in that moment, lying there exposed and vulnerable on the floor of my own home, the centerpiece of a spectacle I never wanted, that something inside me clicked. The pain in my hip was real, but the pain in my heart, the sting of decades of ungratefulness and dismissal, burned hotter. A cold, absolute clarity settled over me. This was it. The final indignity. The culmination of a life where I had given, and she had taken, with not a thought for the source. The facade of the gentle, slightly ditzy old woman shattered, not only for my family, but for me. The sleeping lioness, long dormant, stretched and yawned, its eyes suddenly wide open. "I'm perfectly fine, Emily," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady, belying the tremor that ran through my body. I looked directly at Bethany, who was now fussing over the spilled food, oblivious to the storm brewing in my eyes. She did not know it then, but this fall, this public humiliation, was not the end of my story. It was the spark. And in that very same night, as I lay there, feeling the cold kiss of the polished floor, I swore to myself, with every fiber of my being, that I would change her life. Permanently. And profoundly. When she woke up the next morning, her world would be unrecognizable. She would have 99 missed calls, and they would be the least of her worries. They helped me up eventually, a flurry of awkward hands and whispered apologies. Daniel, his face a mottled pink, mumbled something about unforeseen accidents. Bethany, after a perfunctory, eye-rolling, "So sorry, Mother," immediately turned her attention back to the ruined brie, calling a bewildered catering assistant to clean up the disaster. Only Emily remained by my side, her small hand warm on my arm, her gaze conveying a wordless sympathy that was both a comfort and a sharp reminder of the chasm between true feeling and manufactured politeness. I waved off her concern, assuring everyone I was fine, just a little shaken. The performance of the frail old woman had to continue, just for a little while longer. I retreated to my bedroom soon after, feigning a headache. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me off from the clinking glasses and forced laughter that still echoed from the dining room. The silence of my sanctuary was a balm, but beneath it a storm raged. I limped to my dressing table, the mirror reflecting a face that, despite the pain, held a new, formidable resolve. The lines around my eyes, the silver threads in my hair, they were no longer just markers of age, but etchings of a history my family knew nothing about. I sat on the edge of my bed, the exquisite silk of my evening gown feeling like a costume I was desperate to shed. The pain in my hip throbbed, a dull, persistent beat against the surge of adrenaline. It was a physical manifestation of a deeper wound, one that had festered for years. How many times had I ignored the slights, the condescension, the thinly veiled disdain? How many times had I excused Bethany's entitlement as youthful exuberance, then as the demands of modern life, then simply as her nature? I had been a mother, a protector, a provider. I had poured my heart and, more importantly, my resources into ensuring her comfort, her success, her happiness. And what had I received in return? A push. A public humiliation. A dismissive laugh. "This spot belongs to my freshness and beauty now. Go on, darling, move aside." Her words, sharp and cruel, echoed in my mind. They weren't just about a chair. They were about everything. My value. My relevance. My very right to exist in my own space, in my own life, as anything other than a fading shadow. A bitterness, cold and potent, flooded me. It wasn't the fleeting anger of a bruised ego, It was the settled, deep-seated resentment of a woman who had given too much and been taken for granted for far too long. But beneath the bitterness, something else stirred, a memory, a forgotten self. I closed my eyes, and the opulent bedroom faded, replaced by flashes of a different life. A younger me, sharp-suited and sharper-minded, walking into a boardroom filled with men twice my age, their skepticism melting under the heat of my intellect. A younger me, negotiating deals worth fortunes, her voice steady, her resolve unyielding. A younger me, meticulously building, brick by painstaking brick, an empire that no one, not even my late husband, had fully understood. He, bless his kind but simple soul, had seen me as his beloved wife, a devoted mother. And that's what I had become, eventually, after years of the high-stakes game. I had chosen to retreat, to embrace the quiet domesticity, to pour my energies into my family, believing it was the right path, the kinder path. I had wanted to avoid the judgment, the envy, the sheer exhaustion of always being the woman who did that. But the woman who did that was still here, dormant, but not dead. Tonight, Bethany had woken her. I opened my eyes. The reflection in the mirror was still Agnes Miller, the grandmother, but there was a flicker in her eyes now, a glint of the steel that had once bent markets to her will. The resolution crystallized, cold and pure. Bethany had pushed me to the floor. Now I would push her off the pedestal she had built from my sacrifices. I would not just change her life. I would dismantle it and force her to build it anew, on her own 2 feet, without the comfort of my hidden kingdom. My gaze drifted to a small, unassuming antique box on my nightstand, a gift from my late husband. Inside, beneath layers of silk scarves, lay an old, heavy-duty satellite phone. It looked out of place, an anomaly in this serene room. I hadn't used it in years, not since I'd officially retired from my more clandestine activities. My fingers, trembling slightly, traced the cold metal. This wasn't a family phone. It was a link to a world I had deliberately abandoned. I pulled out the phone, pressed the power button. The faint glow of the screen, almost alien in the darkness, illuminated the room. My mind, usually a placid pond, was now a rushing river of calculations, strategies, contingencies. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about justice. About teaching a lesson that had been refused for too long. And about reclaiming my own narrative. With practiced efficiency, I scrolled through the limited contact list, my finger hovering over one name, Robert. My old friend. My most trusted confidant. The only man who knew the full extent of Agnes Miller's true capabilities and her carefully constructed double life. He would understand. He would not judge. He would execute. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. The call would awaken forces that had been sleeping for decades. It would unravel a lifetime of careful concealment. But the cost, I realized, was now far less than the cost of continuing to endure. I pressed call. The faint whirring of the connection was the only sound in the room. It was late, past midnight, on my 70th birthday. But for Robert and for me, it was just the beginning. Robert, I said, when his groggy voice answered, "It's Agnes. I need you to activate Protocol Nightingale. All of it. Starting first thing tomorrow morning." My voice was crisp, clear, and utterly devoid of the warmth or hesitation he'd become accustomed to over the years. This was the voice of the woman who built empires, not the grandmother who baked cookies. There was a pregnant pause on the other end, a moment of stunned silence. Then, Robert, ever the professional, simply said, "Agnes. Are you certain?" "Absolutely," I replied, my gaze fixed on the empty spot at the head of the table in my mind's eye. "It's time for my daughter to learn the true meaning of freshness and beauty, and the true cost of disrespect." I hung up, my hand steady. The die was cast. The old Agnes, the one who navigated boardrooms and international markets with an iron will, was back. Bethany had pushed me to the floor. She had no idea she had just pushed me back into my throne. The next morning dawned, crisp and indifferent, painting the opulent curtains of Bethany's master bedroom with thin stripes of gold. She stirred lazily, a hand reaching for the silk sheets, then for the warmth of Daniel's side, though he was already gone, no doubt off to his golf course or some early morning networking breakfast, she vaguely recalled him mentioning. Her head throbbed faintly from the champagne, a gentle reminder of her triumphant performance at Mother's rather dull birthday party. Oh, how her mother had looked, sprawled on the floor like a broken doll. Honestly, the drama. And the mess. Bethany stretched, luxuriating in the silence, a rare commodity in their sprawling, impeccably designed home. Her eyes flickered open, catching her reflection in the gilded mirror opposite the bed. Perfect. Barely a wrinkle, even after a night of celebration. My freshness and beauty. The phrase hummed in her mind, a comforting mantra. She owned this. She owned her youth, her looks, her influence. She owned her life, a life built on effortless elegance and the comforting cushion of inherited wealth, or rather, the wealth she assumed would one day be hers. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, intending to scroll through social media, perhaps post a perfectly staged photo of her waking glow. The screen, however, was a chaotic mosaic of notifications. Missed calls. Dozens of them. A cold dread, foreign and unwelcome, trickled down her spine. 99 missed calls. The number glared at her, an accusation. Her perfectly manicured thumb hovered over the screen, then tapped. The calls were from everyone. Her personal assistant, frantic. Her bank, multiple numbers, flagged with urgent warnings. Her boutique manager, hysterical. Her hairstylist, who never called before noon. Daniel, whose calls she usually ignored, had left a string of increasingly agitated voicemails. She started with her PA, a young woman named Chloe, whose usual calm demeanor had dissolved into a panicked shriek. "Ms. Miller." "Oh my God, Ms. Miller, thank goodness you answered. Everything is gone. The accounts, the investments, the salon." Bethany snatched the phone away from her ear, the sudden shrillness a physical blow. "Chloe, calm down. What are you talking about? What's gone?" Her voice, usually smooth and confident, wavered. "The bank. They've frozen everything. Every single account, every line of credit. They said the grantor revoked all access, all funds. And the salon, Ms. Miller, they've seized it. The landlords, the suppliers, everyone is calling. The investors are pulling out. It's all gone." Chloe's voice broke into sobs. "Grantor?" Bethany's mind reeled. What grantor? Her father had died years ago, leaving everything to Mother. Mother, who was just Mother. Dithery, sweet, harmless Mother. The phone vibrated again. Another call. Her personal banker, a man named Mr. Henderson, whose tone was always one of deferential respect, now sounded clipped and stern. "Ms. Miller, I'm afraid I have very grave news. All accounts associated with the Miller Trust and your personal holdings linked to it have been completely liquidated or frozen. We received explicit instructions early this morning. There is nothing we can do." "Instructions from whom?" Bethany demanded, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "Who gave these instructions?" A beat of uncomfortable silence. "From the primary account holder, Ms. Miller. Agnes Miller. Your mother." The words hit her like a physical punch. Agnes. Mother. It couldn't be. Mother didn't understand finances. Mother barely understood how to use her new smart TV. This was a nightmare. A cruel joke. Her phone began to ring again, a relentless, insistent buzzing that seemed to mock her. The luxury of her bedroom, the soft sheets, the expensive art, it all suddenly felt precarious, built on shifting sands. Panic, raw and unadulterated, seized her. She tried to call Daniel. No answer. She tried her friends, the ones she wined and dined, the ones who admired her impeccable taste and effortless lifestyle. Their phones went straight to voicemail. Frantically, she threw back the covers and rushed to her walk-in closet, a cathedral of designer labels. She needed to think. She needed to dress. She needed to project an image of control, even if she felt none. But as she pulled out a silk blouse, a thought colder than any panic pierced her. If her accounts were frozen, how would she pay for the dry cleaning? How would she pay for the new designer bag she'd ordered? How would she pay for anything? A new realization, chilling in its simplicity, washed over her. This wasn't just about the salon or her investments. This was about everything. The car, the house, her entire lifestyle. It all stemmed from the comfortable, invisible flow of funds that Mother had always, seemingly endlessly, provided. She stumbled out of the closet, her face pale, her hands clammy. The house felt too big, too empty, suddenly echoing with the silence of impending ruin. She needed to talk to Mother. Now. This was some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding. Mother would never. Meanwhile, miles away, in her own quiet kitchen, Agnes sipped her Earl Grey tea, the morning sun streaming through the window, warming her old bones. The news played softly on the television, a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. She watched a segment on the stock market, her eyes following the intricate charts with a focused intensity that belied her serene expression. Her phone sat on the counter, glowing faintly with a single message: Protocol Nightingale, initiated. All assets reallocated. Confirmation pending. R. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Agnes's lips. She felt no triumph, no malice, only a profound sense of weary satisfaction. The symphony of disruption had begun. Bethany's frantic calls, her bewildered panic, Agnes could almost hear them, a discordant chorus in the distance. She knew the chaos unfolding in her daughter's gilded cage. She had orchestrated every note of it. 99 missed calls. A mere overture. The true performance was yet to come. The quiet, little old lady savored her tea, the morning light illuminating the steely resolve in her eyes. The game had truly begun. The relentless assault on Bethany's phone continued, a barrage of ringing that felt less like a device and more like a torture instrument. She paced her lavish living room, the Persian rug feeling strangely alien beneath her bare feet. Every call, every message from an increasingly desperate Daniel, every voicemail filled with the panicked wails of former colleagues and bewildered creditors, chipped away at her carefully constructed reality. She felt like a beautiful, fragile vase teetering on the edge of a precipice, and the person pushing it, slowly but surely, was her own mother. Mother! For God's sake, answer me, she shrieked into the receiver for the 10th time, her voice raw, cracking with frustration and a rising tide of fear. The phone went straight to voicemail again, a polite, calm voice saying, "You've reached Agnes Miller. Please leave a message." It was Mother's voice, sweet and unassuming, yet now it sounded like a ghost, mocking her from beyond an impenetrable wall. She threw the phone onto the plush sofa, a strangled cry escaping her lips. This is insane. She's lost her mind. Daniel, are you listening to me? She's gone completely senile. Daniel, looking haggard and pale, sat slumped in an armchair, clutching his own phone like a lifeline. Senile, Bethany? This isn't senility. This is deliberate. My clients are pulling out of the merger. Our line of credit is gone. The lease on my office building, he buried his face in his hands. She's systematically dismantled everything. Who is your mother? Bethany stared at him, her own panic briefly eclipsed by a flicker of irritation. She's my mother, Daniel. She's always been a little eccentric, yes, but harmless. She bakes cookies. She watches gardening shows. She's never understood money beyond balancing a checkbook. But even as she spoke the words, a cold sliver of doubt pricked at her. Was it truly possible? That meek, mild-mannered woman? Meanwhile, in her quaint, sunlit kitchen, Agnes hummed a forgotten tune as she meticulously arranged freshly cut roses into a crystal vase. Her phone sat on the counter, occasionally vibrating with a new notification. Bethany again. Daniel again. She glanced at the screen, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, but didn't answer. She was not avoiding them. She was simply unavailable. Unavailable to the demands of a world she was systematically recalibrating. She remembered a time, decades ago, when her own phone had buzzed with a similar urgency. But then, the calls had been from CEOs, from powerful financiers, from international brokers. She had been the Nightingale, a moniker whispered in hushed tones in exclusive circles. Not for her singing, but for her almost mystical ability to navigate the darkest, most intricate labyrinths of global finance, making fortunes appear and disappear with the elegance of a phantom. She had built her empire not with brute force, but with intellect, foresight, and a network of loyal, discreet individuals like Robert. She had played the long game, patiently cultivating assets, anticipating trends, and always staying 3 steps ahead. Her wealth wasn't just substantial, it was layered, diversified, and virtually untraceable to anyone who didn't know the exact codes and keys. Her family, especially her late husband, a man who believed a woman's place was in the home, had been oblivious. They had seen her as Agnes, the devoted wife, the loving mother. And that's what she let them see. It had been easier, safer, less complicated. The world of high finance was ruthless, dangerous. She had yearned for a quiet life, for the simple pleasures she had foregone in her relentless pursuit of security. She had provided Bethany with a trust, an allowance, access to capital, all carefully structured so that it appeared to stem from her husband's modest, yet comfortable, inheritance. Bethany had never questioned it. She'd simply consumed it, lavishly and without thought. "What do you mean, you need more money, dear?" Agnes had asked years ago, when Bethany, fresh out of college, had demanded funds for a boutique business that Agnes knew, with one glance at the business plan, was doomed to fail. Bethany had waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Mother, you wouldn't understand. It's for my vision. And besides, Father left plenty, didn't he? We're well off." The words had been a familiar sting, a disregard for the reality that the plenty was Agnes's careful, often dangerous, work. She picked up her phone now, not to answer Bethany, but to send a brief, cryptic text. She knew her daughter would scour every message, every word for a clue, an opening, a weakness. To Bethany, problems with money? How unexpected. What goes around, comes around, darling. Agnes placed the phone back down. Her message was clear, if enigmatic to Bethany. It was a direct echo of a lesson she had learned early in her own life. Every action has a consequence. Bethany had lived a life devoid of consequence, sheltered by a wealth she neither understood nor appreciated. That era was over. A memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. A tense meeting in Geneva, a table full of skeptical investors, all men, all dismissive. One had leaned forward, a sneer on his face. "What could a little bird like you possibly know about real money, Miss Miller?" Agnes had smiled, a slow, calculating smile, and proceeded to dissect his portfolio, revealing weaknesses he didn't even know he had, turning his dismissiveness into desperate admiration within an hour. The little bird, he learned, could tear down mountains. She wasn't a little bird anymore. She was an old woman, yes, but the fire, the intellect, the steel that had forged her empire was undiminished. It had simply been resting. And now it was fully, terrifyingly awake. The phone vibrated again. Another call from Bethany. Agnes let it ring, her gaze drifting out the window, past her perfectly manicured garden. The world outside was still the same, but for Bethany, it was already crumbling. The quiet matriarch allowed herself a small, internal sigh. This wasn't easy. A mother's heart, even a resolute one, felt the weight of such a drastic measure. But this was an act of tough love, a surgical strike to remove a cancerous entitlement. "What goes around, comes around," she whispered to the empty room, not as a curse, but as a statement of universal law. And her daughter, for the very first time, was about to experience its full, unyielding force. The family gathered, not out of concern for Agnes, but out of a desperate, bewildered fury at the seismic shifts occurring in Bethany's life. Bethany herself had orchestrated the emergency meeting, calling upon her younger brother, Mark, and her Aunt Carol, my sister-in-law, a woman whose life revolved around community gossip and keeping up appearances. They convened in Bethany's ostentatious living room, now feeling less like a showroom and more like a battlefield. The air crackled with accusation and thinly veiled panic. Bethany, her face blotchy and devoid of its usual polished sheen, paced frantically. "She's lost her mind, I tell you. Mother has gone completely senile. She's frozen everything. My accounts, Daniel's business, my salon, it's all gone. The bank says she gave explicit instructions. Mark, a perpetually indecisive man who had always lived in Bethany's shadow, wrung his hands. But Aunt Agnes? She's so sweet. She wouldn't. She can't possibly have that kind of power. And why would she do this? His voice trailed off, a hint of unease in his tone. He, too, had benefited from the occasional loan or gift from my seemingly endless generosity. Aunt Carol, her usual bright smile replaced by a pinched, disapproving frown, sniffed. Senility is a terrible thing. Poor Agnes. She probably thinks she's playing some sort of game. We need to intervene. Get a doctor, perhaps a conservatorship. Before she gives away everything to a cult. Her eyes started around, searching for agreement. The thought of my money not flowing to the proper channels, meaning her extended family, clearly horrified her. Emily sat quietly on the edge of a velvet couch, observing the scene with a mix of dread and a strange, nascent respect. Her mother was a hurricane of panic, her freshness and beauty dissolving under the pressure. Her Uncle Mark was a whimpering mess. Her great-aunt Carol was more concerned with the optics and the potential loss of future handouts. Emily had always seen her grandmother as gentle, perhaps a little naive, a safe harbor from her mother's tempestuous nature. But the transformation she'd witnessed yesterday, the quiet resolve in Agnes's eyes, hinted at a depth she had never suspected. The phone rang again. Bethany snatched it up. Oh, thank God, it's her. She put it on speaker, her voice switching instantly to a practiced blend of desperation and indignant anger. Mother, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? You're ruining us. My voice, when it came through the speaker, was calm, almost melodious, utterly unperturbed by the storm raging around it. Good morning, Bethany. Ruining you? That seems rather dramatic. I merely tidied up my affairs. After all, a woman of my age must ensure her legacy is handled responsibly, wouldn't you agree? Responsibly? Bethany shrieked, her face turning crimson. You've left me with nothing. The salon is being repossessed. Daniel's merger fell apart. How could you do this? The salon, I mused, a phantom smile touching my lips. A lovely vanity project, dear. But financially unsound, shall we say? And Daniel's merger? Perhaps it was built on foundations less solid than he led you to believe. One must always inspect the balance sheets, Bethany. A lesson I tried to impart, but you were always so busy with your freshness and beauty. My voice held a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of irony. Aunt Carol interjected, her voice dripping with faux concern. Agnes, darling, are you quite well? This isn't like you. We're worried about you. Perhaps a nice visit to Dr. Albright. Carol, I said, my voice hardening ever so slightly, I am perfectly well. And perfectly lucid. More lucid, perhaps, than I have been in decades. As for Dr. Albright, I assure you, my mental faculties are not in question. My decisions are simply decisive. Mark, ever the diplomat, tried a different approach. But Aunt Agnes, this is family. We're all here for you. Just tell us what happened. We can fix it, surely. Bethany is your daughter. Indeed, Mark. Bethany is my daughter, I replied, a wistful note in my voice. And as her mother, I have always wished for her to stand on her own 2 feet. To understand the value of honest work, of true creation, not just consumption. Perhaps I've been too lenient. Perhaps this is the only way to teach her. A gasp of outrage from Bethany. Teach me. You're destroying my life to teach me? This is cruel, Mother. Absolutely cruel. Cruel. I echoed, the word hanging in the air. Was it cruel, Bethany, when you shoved me to the floor on my 70th birthday, telling me that my place was to make way for your freshness and beauty? Was that not a lesson in cruelty? A stunned silence descended upon Bethany's living room. Even Aunt Carol seemed momentarily speechless. Emily's eyes widened, her gaze shifting between her grandmother's calm voice and her mother's slack-jawed expression. She remembered that moment, the sickening thud, her mother's dismissive laugh. Her grandmother's words, though delivered remotely, had the force of a thunderclap. I am merely providing an education, dear, I continued, my voice now completely devoid of warmth, in the harsh realities of the world you've so carefully avoided. And it seems many of you also need a refresher course. Consider it a late-life masterclass from your dear, old mother. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual responsibilities to attend to, and with that, I hung up. The abrupt click of the phone resonated through Bethany's living room, leaving her speechless, holding a dead phone to her ear. I leaned back in my armchair, a sigh escaping my lips. My resolve was firm, but the conversation had been draining. It wasn't easy, listening to their accusations, feeling their anger. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The facade was crumbling, and the real Agnes was stepping out. I thought of Emily. She hadn't said much, but I could feel her presence, her quiet observation, her genuine concern. She was different. There was a glimmer of something real in her, a soul not yet corrupted by the shallow desires that consumed the rest of them. She was the one crack in my otherwise impenetrable wall, the one person I hoped might truly understand, might even benefit from this harsh, necessary lesson. The others? They would learn, one way or another. And the learning would be painful. But it would be real. The days that followed the family council blurred into a terrifying kaleidoscope for Bethany. The initial panic solidified into a cold, hard dread. Each morning brought a fresh wave of humiliation and loss. Her meticulously crafted life, once a gleaming monument to effortless luxury, was now systematically dismantled, brick by agonizing brick. Her beloved salon, Bethany's Bloom, a monument to her vanity and a drain on my resources, was the first casualty. The bank, acting on my explicit instructions, seized all assets and froze its operating accounts. The landlords, alerted to the financial instability, initiated eviction proceedings. Within a week, the salon's chic windows were papered over with official notices, its once bustling interior stripped bare. Her employees, whom she had treated with a casual disdain, now called her, not for paychecks, but to hurl accusations of negligence and ruin. The carefully cultivated network of high society clients evaporated, replaced by the chilling silence of blocked numbers and unanswered emails. Her freshness and beauty, which she believed were her primary assets, found no buyers in the harsh marketplace of reality. Daniel's business, built on a shaky foundation of speculative investments and generous credit lines backed by what he assumed was my inherited wealth, quickly followed suit. Without the invisible safety net, his partners panicked and pulled out of the merger. His office lease was revoked, his assets frozen. He became a ghost in their grand house, muttering to himself, his once sharp suits now hanging forlornly in the closet. The veneer of his success, a carefully constructed illusion, had peeled away, revealing the fragile, desperate man beneath. Bethany tried everything. She called every lawyer, every financial advisor, every friend she had cultivated over the years. Each conversation ended the same way, a polite refusal, a hesitant apology, a strained silence. "I'm sorry, Ms. Miller, but your mother's instructions are ironclad. All assets have been legally reallocated. There's no loophole." Or, more often, "Bethany, darling, I'd love to help, but my hands are tied. You understand." The understanding was clear. She was no longer useful. She was no longer a source of lavish parties, expensive gifts, or powerful connections. She was a liability. Her designer credit cards, once limitless symbols of her status, were repeatedly declined, each rejected transaction a tiny, public dagger to her pride. At the high-end boutique where she was a preferred client, the sales assistant, usually fawning, offered a pitying smile. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Miller, but there seems to be an issue with your card. Perhaps you could try another form of payment." The whispered conversations that followed her departure, the knowing looks, were more painful than any physical blow. She started losing weight, not from diet, but from stress. The carefully sculpted lines of her face became sharper, harsher. Her hair, usually immaculate, sometimes looked unkempt in her desperate rush. The meticulously applied makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, the haunted look that began to replace her accustomed confidence. The queen of freshness and beauty was slowly but surely decaying under the relentless pressure of reality. She's a monster, Daniel. Bethany shrieked one evening, collapsing onto the sofa, a half-empty bottle of wine clutched in her hand. The caterers, the cleaners, the gardeners, all had been let go. The house, usually spotless, now held a faint film of dust, a testament to their new, impoverished existence. She hates me. She wants to see me suffer. Daniel merely grunted, staring blankly at the wall. He was as lost as she was, perhaps more so, having never really known how to stand on his own. Meanwhile, in her cozy home, Agnes sat by the window, watching the leaves turn a vibrant gold. Robert called her daily, his reports precise and dispassionate. The salon's closure is complete, Agnes. Landlords have taken possession. All inventory liquidated, funds redirected as per your instructions. Daniel's venture capitalist firm dissolved. His personal assets are minimal, as expected. The house is next, I believe. Bethany tried to secure a loan from the Sterling Group. Denied. I pulled a few strings. He chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. They still remember the nightingale. Agnes listened, her expression unreadable. She felt no joy, no glee in their suffering. Only a quiet, resolute sadness that it had come to this. She had provided Bethany with the tools for a comfortable life, a life free from the struggles Agnes herself had known. But Bethany had chosen to use those tools for superficiality, for entitlement, for cruelty. A memory flashed, a small Bethany, perhaps 6 years old, tearing apart a delicate toy train her father had spent hours assembling for her, simply because she preferred the box it came in. My husband, bless his heart, had just sighed and bought her another. I had watched, a cold certainty forming in my stomach even then. The pattern had begun early. Agnes had made a deliberate choice to shield her family from the true nature of her wealth. My husband, a kind but somewhat conventional man, would have been horrified by the cutthroat world I navigated. He valued stability, peace, and simple virtues. And I, in my love for him, had built a separate, secret life to provide that stability, that peace. Bethany, growing up, had merely reaped the benefits, never seeing the sweat, the risk, the calculated ruthlessness that went into maintaining her gilded cage. I wanted her to have an easier life, a better life than mine, free from the burdens of constant battle. Instead, I had inadvertently created a monster of consumption. Now, that monster was starving. Robert, Agnes said, her voice clear, are the provisions for Emily secured? Absolutely, Agnes. The trust for her education and living expenses is completely separate, untouchable by her parents' current situation. It's robust. Good, I replied, a flicker of warmth in my voice. Emily was the only exception, the one green shoot in the barren landscape. She was the reason this wasn't pure destruction, but a surgical recalibration. I hung up, a heavy sigh escaping my lips. The fall of Bethany's empire was almost complete. It was a brutal lesson, one I never wished to teach. But some lessons I had learned long ago can only be learned through the scorching fire of experience. And Bethany, despite her protests, was finally about to feel the heat. The chill of an early autumn evening settled over Agnes's garden, but inside her study, a fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the rich mahogany bookshelves. The room was a sanctuary, filled with first editions, antique globes, and the comforting scent of old paper and leather. It was here, amidst the true artifacts of her life, that Agnes felt most herself, stripped of the grandmotherly persona she wore for the world. Robert arrived precisely at 7, as always. He was a man etched by time and discretion, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp and intelligent behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a slim briefcase, its contents surely filled with the latest updates on Bethany's crumbling world. He poured himself a scotch, knowing Agnes preferred tea, and settled into the worn leather armchair opposite her. The house is officially in foreclosure, Agnes, Robert stated, without preamble. They've been served notice. Bethany and Daniel have a month to vacate. He paused, taking a sip. She tried to appeal to the bank, citing her mother's sudden incapacitation and irrational behavior. But as you predicted, all medical records you subtly orchestrated years ago confirm your perfect mental acuity. A faint, dry smile touched his lips. And your last medical exam was, as usual, impeccable. Agnes merely nodded, a distant look in her eyes. Good. We cannot have any loopholes, Robert. The lesson must be complete. Indeed, he replied, then leaned forward, his voice softening. Are you truly all right, Agnes? This is a heavy burden to carry, even for you. Your own daughter. Agnes looked into the dancing flames, her 70 years weighing heavily on her shoulders. It is heavy, Robert. More so than you know. A mother's heart, even when hardened by necessity, still feels the sting. But this isn't just about punishment. It's about revelation. For her, yes. But also, in a way, for me. She sighed, a long, weary sound. You remember, don't you? All those years ago. When I was just starting out. Her gaze drifted to a faded photograph on her desk. A young woman, not much older than Emily, but with a fierce, almost predatory glint in her eyes. It was Agnes, in her late 20s, standing in front of a modest, brick-fronted building with a sign that read Miller Investments. I remember, Robert said, his voice laced with respect. You were a force of nature, Agnes. While other women were chasing husbands and bridge games, you were dissecting markets and building fortunes from nothing. They called you the Nightingale because you could move through the financial jungle unseen, striking when no one expected it. And because I never truly owned anything publicly, Agnes added, a wry smile. My husband, he was a good man, Robert. Kind, honorable, but utterly naive about the true nature of wealth. He believed in honest toil, in simple dividends. If he had known the risks I took, the shadows I danced in, he would have been devastated. He wanted a quiet life for his family, and I promised him I would provide it. My way. She stood, walking to the large bay window, staring out into the deepening twilight. I built my empire in the blind spots of the financial world, investing in nascent technologies no one believed in, identifying trends before they became trends. Sometimes, yes, playing in the gray areas where conventional ethics blurred. I funded startups that others deemed too risky. I developed algorithms that predicted market shifts with unsettling accuracy. I learned early on that true power wasn't in public display, but in unseen control. I pulled strings in boardrooms halfway across the world, while my family believed I was at a PTA meeting. And the sheer volume of wealth you accumulated, it was staggering, Robert murmured. Most of it, even I don't know the full extent of. You always kept your secrets close. Because secrets were power, Robert. And safety. The world doesn't like a powerful woman, especially one who doesn't play by their rules. I created a labyrinth of trusts, shell corporations, and offshore accounts, all feeding into the main reservoir, which only I, and later you, truly understood. I gave Bethany access to a generous stream from that reservoir, disguised as father's inheritance. I wanted her to have the advantages I never had. These. The freedom to choose her own path. Agnes turned from the window, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I watched her, Robert. I hoped she would take that freedom and build something real. Something meaningful. But she never did. She just consumed. She saw the wealth as her birthright, something that appeared magically, effortlessly. She believed her freshness and beauty were enough. That they entitled her to everything without effort, without gratitude. She paused, remembering the birthday. That push, it wasn't just physical. It was a push against my very existence, my worth. It was the final straw. I realized then that my kindness, my generosity, had not fostered growth, but resentment. I had coddled her into oblivion. I had to break the cycle. So you decided to pull the plug, Robert concluded, his voice matter-of-fact. Completely. And irrevocably. Yes. Every cent she believed was hers, every security she relied upon, every future comfort. It was all derived from my work, my sacrifice, my hidden life. I chose to redirect it. To charitable foundations focused on empowering young women in STEM, the kind of work I always wished I could have done more openly. To scholarships for ambitious, deserving students. And to Emily's future, untainted by her mother's self-absorption. Robert took another sip of his scotch. The plan is audacious, Agnes. It will leave her with virtually nothing. She'll have to find a job, learn to budget, to truly work for the first time in her life. Precisely, Agnes said, her voice firm. I am not taking away her life, Robert. I am taking away the gilded cage I built for her. I am forcing her to live. To experience the struggle, the triumphs, the hard-won dignity of earning her own way. Perhaps only then will she truly understand what freshness and beauty truly mean. Or what legacy truly costs. And you, Agnes? Robert asked, his gaze gentle. What about your own legacy? This will forever change your relationship with your daughter. It may never recover. Agnes walked back to her armchair, sinking into its plush embrace. My legacy, Robert, is not in wealth or a name. It is in the lessons learned, in the strength found. If Bethany learns nothing else, if she only learns that actions have consequences, that is a legacy enough. And as for our relationship, it was broken long ago. This is merely the honest reckoning. I am not choosing to lose a daughter. I am choosing to reclaim myself. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling fire. Agnes closed her eyes, not in weariness, but in a profound sense of peace. The hardest part, the decision, the initial execution, was done. Now, she simply had to see it through. The path ahead for Bethany was steep and unforgiving, but for Agnes, after decades of playing a role, the way was finally clear. She was no longer just a grandmother. She was the architect of her own fate and the stern, uncompromising teacher of another. The once immaculate lawn of Bethany's sprawling house was now overgrown, the roses untended, their petals wilting. The pool, a shimmering blue expanse of luxury, sat stagnant, a murky green film spreading across its surface. The for sale sign planted firmly by the driveway stood as a stark monument to her ruin. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the fateful birthday, 3 weeks of relentless, systematic stripping away of everything Bethany held dear. The eviction notice was final. They had nowhere to go. Daniel was a broken man, muttering about lawsuits he couldn't afford and opportunities that had evaporated. He blamed Agnes, of course, but his accusations lacked the fire of conviction, replaced by a hollow despair. Bethany, however, was not broken. She was incensed. Her panic had curdled into a cold, hard rage. She hadn't just lost her lifestyle, she had lost her identity, her sense of self, which was intrinsically tied to her possessions and her perceived status. The final insult came in the form of a small, discreet letter from Robert, delivered by courier. It was a formal notification that a modest sum had been deposited into a basic checking account opened in her name, just enough for a few months' rent in a small apartment and basic necessities. No luxury, no frills, no credit cards. The accompanying note, terse and official, stated, "Your mother's final provision. All future support will require demonstrable effort on your part." It was a charity handout, a pittance from the woman who had just stripped her bare. That was the breaking point. Bethany didn't call. She didn't text. She got into her car, now almost out of gas, its luxury interior feeling like a cruel joke, and drove to my house. Her once flawless makeup was smudged, her expensive clothes wrinkled, her hair a disheveled mess. The carefully constructed facade of freshness and beauty had cracked and splintered, revealing the raw, desperate woman beneath. She didn't knock. She hammered on the door, a frantic, insistent rhythm that reverberated through my quiet home. I had been expecting her. I heard Emily's hesitant voice from the living room. "Grandma, maybe you should answer it. She sounds really upset." "Let her be upset," I replied calmly, my hands busy with a jigsaw puzzle of a Tuscan landscape. Sometimes upset is necessary. But when the hammering turned to a frantic, ear-splitting pounding, I finally rose. I opened the door, not wide, but just enough to see her face, contorted with fury and despair. "Mother, what have you done to me?" she shrieked, her voice hoarse, her eyes bloodshot. "You've ruined me. You've ruined Daniel. We have nowhere to go. No money. Nothing." I looked at her, truly looked at her. The anger, the fear, the desperation. It was all there, stark and ugly. My heart ached, a deep, familiar ache that came with witnessing a child's pain, even when that pain was self-inflicted. But my resolve remained unwavering. "You have your health, Bethany," I said, my voice quiet, almost gentle, a stark contrast to her hysteria. "You have your youth. Your freshness and beauty, as you so often reminded me. Those are not nothing, dear. They are more than many possess." "Don't mock me," she screamed, pushing against the doorframe, trying to force her way in. "You're a cruel, vindictive old woman. You've gone mad. You think this is some kind of lesson? This is torture." "It is a lesson, Bethany," I corrected, my gaze steady. "A lesson in responsibility. In consequence. In the value of what you earn versus what you merely receive. For too long, you believed my provisions were your entitlement. They were not. But I'm your daughter," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her last vestiges of glamour. "How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? What kind of mother takes everything from her child?" I felt a coldness settle around me. The kind of mother who realized her child had become a parasite. The kind of mother who watched her daughter mock her, humiliate her, and then dismiss her as irrelevant. The kind of mother who understood that true love sometimes requires the sharpest blades of truth. Her eyes, wild with desperation, suddenly fixed on Emily, who had quietly appeared in the hallway behind me. "Emily, tell your grandmother. Tell her what she's doing to us. Tell her how unfair this is. We'll be homeless, darling. Homeless. Do you want to live on the street because your crazy grandmother stole everything?" Emily flinched, her young face a mask of conflict. She looked at her mother's distraught face, then at mine, calm and unyielding. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations and dawning realization. "Mother," I said, my voice hardening, "do not use your daughter as a pawn in your games. This is between you and me, and the consequences are yours alone to bear." Bethany turned back to me, her face contorted in a final, desperate plea, laced with a bitter threat. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you're teaching me a lesson. But you're just a spiteful, lonely old woman who's lost her mind. And you'll die alone, Mother. You'll die with nothing but your spite, and I won't even be there to bury you." The words, sharp and venomous, struck a chord. I felt a pang, deep in my chest. Die alone. It was a fear I had buried long ago, one that had sometimes, in my quieter moments, surfaced from the depths. But I met her gaze, unflinching. "Perhaps," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "but I will die with my dignity intact." "Something you seem to have forgotten the meaning of, Bethany. The door to my home, and to my heart, remains close to you until you learn it. Now, if you'll excuse me." And with that, I closed the door, gently but firmly, leaving Bethany standing alone on my porch, her sobs echoing in the crisp autumn air. I heard her kick the door once, a futile, impotent gesture, before her footsteps finally faded. I leaned against the closed door, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Emily, pale and wide-eyed, stood a few feet away. She didn't say anything, but her eyes held a new, complex understanding. She had witnessed the raw, brutal truth. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. Was that really necessary?" I turned to her, my own eyes filled with a weariness that went bone deep. "Sometimes, Emily, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to force them to stand on their own. Even if they hate you for it. Especially if they hate you for it." I knew Bethany's words would haunt me. The sting of her hatred was real. But I also knew, with a certainty forged in the fires of my past, that I had done what I had to do. The final act was coming. The reckoning for all of us. And I, Agnes Miller, the quiet grandmother, the ruthless nightingale, was ready for it. My heart ached, but my resolve remained unbroken. The invitation had been terse, delivered via certified mail to each bewildered family member, a summons to Agnes Miller's residence for a final discussion regarding the family estate and future provisions. The tone was formal, cold, devoid of the usual saccharine warmth they associated with their matriarch. The date was set for a week after Bethany's desperate, screaming visit, allowing the dust to settle, or rather, for the fear and uncertainty to fester. The tension in my living room was palpable as they assembled. Bethany, looking gaunt and pale, sat rigidly beside Daniel, whose eyes darted nervously around the room, avoiding my gaze. Mark sat on the edge of a chair, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a furrowed brow. Aunt Carol, dressed impeccably despite the grim circumstances, clutched her handbag as if it contained her last remaining illusions. Only Emily sat quietly in a corner, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on me with an expression of intense, almost fearful anticipation. I stood by the fireplace, not in my usual armchair, but upright, my back straight, my presence commanding. I had chosen a simple, elegant dark suit, a relic from my old life, its lines still sharp, its fabric expensive. My hair was pulled back severely, revealing the sharp planes of my face. I looked not like a grandmother, but like a CEO about to deliver grim quarterly results. Robert stood beside me, a silent, unmoving pillar of support, his briefcase open on a small table, filled with the documents that would soon shatter their world. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick silence. "I understand this has been a confusing and difficult time for many of you. But it is time for clarity. It is time for the truth." Bethany scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "The truth? The truth is you've gone mad, Mother. You've destroyed our lives out of spite." "Silence, Bethany," I said, my voice not raised, but imbued with an authority that instantly quashed her protest. She fell silent, startled by the unexpected command. "For years," I continued, my gaze sweeping across their faces, "you have lived under a false impression. You believed that the comfortable life you enjoyed, the inheritance your father left, was a straightforward matter. You believed I was a simple housewife, managing modest sums. You were wrong." I gestured to Robert. "Robert, if you please." Robert stepped forward, picking up a folder. "As many of you know, Agnes Miller, or rather, Mrs. Andrew Miller, was believed to have inherited a moderate estate from her late husband. This was largely a narrative crafted to protect a deeper truth. I took over. My husband was a wonderful man, but he lived a simple, honest life. His inheritance was indeed modest. The wealth you have all enjoyed, the trust funds, the allowances, the investments for Bethany's ventures, all of it, every single penny, came from my work. My endeavors. My empire." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mark looked bewildered. Aunt Carol's jaw dropped. Daniel stared, slack-jawed. Bethany, for the first time, looked truly stunned, a flicker of genuine shock replacing her anger. "You see," I continued, my voice now laced with a steely resolve, "while I played the role of the devoted wife and mother, I was also the nightingale. A name some of you may have heard whispered in certain financial circles, though never associated with a woman, and certainly not with your quiet Agnes." Robert handed me a stack of papers. I held them up. "These are documents, meticulously detailing decades of investments, of strategic acquisitions, of calculated risks in markets that none of you even knew existed. I built a fortune, not through inherited privilege, but through raw intellect, unrelenting effort, and, sometimes, navigating treacherous waters that would make your current hardship seem like a picnic." I looked directly at Bethany. "I did this, Bethany, so you would never have to. I wanted you to have freedom, opportunity, a life unburdened by the struggles I knew. I set up generous trusts, accounts, discreetly managed by Robert, all designed to give you a foundation. I watched, I hoped, I waited for you to take that gift and build something of your own, something meaningful. To find your own worth, beyond the superficial." My voice dropped, filled with a profound sadness. "But you didn't. You saw it as your due. You squandered it on fleeting pleasures, on vanity projects, on an endless pursuit of status. You grew entitled, ungrateful, and ultimately cruel. Your dismissiveness of me, your utter lack of respect, culminated in that moment on my birthday. That moment when you pushed me aside, claiming my place belonged to your freshness and beauty, was the moment I realized my kindness had become poison. My generosity had fostered weakness, not strength." I placed the documents on the table. "And so I made a decision. A painful, but necessary one. To dismantle the comfortable illusion I had built for you. to reclaim what was mine, and to redistribute it in a way that truly reflects the values I hold, values I hoped to instill. I turned to Robert. Robert, if you would read the details of the reallocation. Robert, ever efficient, began. As per Agnes Miller's explicit and legally binding instructions, all remaining significant assets from the Miller Trust and all accounts previously managed for Bethany Miller and Daniel Miller have been permanently reallocated. A substantial portion, approximately 60%, has been designated to the Agnes Miller Foundation for Women in STEM, a new charitable entity dedicated to funding scholarships and mentorship programs for young women entering scientific and technological fields. Aunt Carol gasped, clutching her chest. Charity. Agnes, what about your family? My family, Carol, I said, my eyes cold, has shown its true colors. But there is one exception. My gaze softened as I looked at Emily. Emily, your future is secure. A fully funded educational trust has been established in your name, covering all university expenses, living costs, and a modest stipend for your personal growth. It is structured to be completely independent of your parents' current situation, accessible only to you, upon certain academic milestones. Emily's face, previously a mixture of shock and sadness, now showed a flicker of astonished hope. She looked at me, a silent, heartfelt thank you in her eyes. As for Bethany Miller and Daniel Miller, Robert continued, his voice devoid of emotion, a final sum has been deposited into a basic, joint checking account. This sum, approximately $20,000, is intended to cover immediate necessities and assist with transitioning to an independent, self-sufficient lifestyle. There will be no further financial support, no further trusts, no further allowances from Agnes Miller. Your mother expects you to now earn your own way, to build your own life, and to understand the value of honest labor for the first time. The room erupted. Bethany sprang to her feet, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. $20,000. That's it. For everything. After you destroyed my business, my home, my life. You're a monster. A twisted, evil monster. You want me to be poor? You want me to suffer? Daniel, finally finding his voice, albeit a high-pitched whine, joined her. This is outrageous. We'll sue. We'll fight this. You can't just take everything. You can try, I said, my voice calm, unflinching. But Robert here, as my longtime legal counsel and architect of these structures, assures me that every step has been legally sound, every transfer meticulously documented. You will find no loophole, no weakness. The wealth was always mine, and I am merely exercising my right to control its disposition. And as for suffering, Bethany, perhaps a little struggle will build character. Something you desperately need. My gaze hardened. I gave you a life of comfort and ease, and you turned it into a weapon against me. I offered you a golden spoon, and you used it to dig your own grave. I am not destroying your life, Bethany. I am simply removing the safety net. The responsibility for what you do now, for who you become, rests entirely with you. You have your freshness and beauty. Use them to build something real. Something lasting. The room descended into chaos, Bethany's enraged screams mingling with Daniel's panicked protests. Aunt Carol, aghast, finally burst into tears, not for Bethany, but for the future comforts she now saw vanishing. I stood there amidst the storm I had unleashed, feeling a strange mix of profound exhaustion and quiet liberation. The mask was finally off. The truth was out. And the silence that followed my final words, even amidst the screaming, felt like a breath of fresh, albeit painful, air. The culmination was complete.